Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership, the show for business executives and global corporations who appreciate a principled biblical lens on leadership, featuring the song Consuming Fire by gospel jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan. You are listening to our Resource Renewal Series featuring shows for times such as these. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership, and today we are talking about open and closed doors. Recently, my husband and I took the Cog Railway up to the top of Pikes Peak. And this is a really spectacular trip to go up to the top of Pikes Peak. It's very beautiful at the top. It's more than 14,000 feet above sea level, and it's the place where America the Beautiful was written. Now, I had not been on the Cog Railway since they've remodeled it, and they remodeled it between 2017 and about 2021. This cog railway has been going up to Pikes Peak since the 1800s, and that's an engineering marvel by itself to think that this railway could go all the way up to the top of Pikes Peak from Manitou Springs in Colorado, which is just outside of Colorado Springs. Now, back in the olden days, when I used to take the cog railway up to the top of Pikes Peak, you could take any train during the day to go up there. You could sit in any seat on the train that was open, and you could come back on any train so long as you did not miss the last train of the day. There was a tremendous amount of flexibility, and it was a lot of fun because you could stay up there for a while, get everything done that you wanted to do, see all the sights, have something to eat in the little visitors shack at the top. At the time was a little visitor shack, and you could also go to the gift shop. Now it's been significantly modernized, so the platforms are much larger up there to view the sights all the way around. It takes longer to walk at the top because of the way they built the platforms. And the visitor center is much more extensive, a much nicer place than the original one. And so it takes a little bit longer if you're going to see the visitor center. The other thing to keep in mind is that with the new plan, you have limitations. So the new rules are you have an assigned seat on a particular train, and you must come back on that exact same train in the exact same seat. The train also has what they call a 3-seat side and a 2-seat side. And back in the day, you would get on whatever side you wanted to get on going up. And if you chose to, you'd ride the opposite side coming down. It just so happens that the 3-seat side is the most scenic going up and coming down. And when you purchase a ticket in advance, the Cog Railway automatically assigns you a seat unless you pay an extra fee and get to choose your own seat. And it's not clear, at least with the way that we did it, whether your seat is going to be a window seat, a middle seat, or an aisle seat. And so it turns out we had a middle seat, we had an aisle seat on the 3-seat side. And also, what's kind of interesting is in the previous way the train used to work, you could cross the aisle at any time, stand up. If there was a better photo op on the other side of the train, you could actually take a picture on that side and so on. Now, you cannot get up and cross the aisle while the train's in motion. You can stand in place, although not very long and not very often. And going up, you have the windows down most of the time until it gets much colder as you get to the top. There's really about a 40-degree difference in temperature from the bottom of the mountain all the way up to the top of the mountain. So the temperature changes significantly. And in the past, when we were standing up, you could take a picture out the window and really have a very good view. Now it's hard to get those pictures outside of the open window, and you may be trying to shoot the picture through the glass window, which creates a tremendous glare. So a little bit more difficult for photography in the new way of doing things. Now, what's interesting is that because there is assigned seating and limited movement, because you can't change seats on the train either, and especially not while it's in movement, it's harder to get everything done that you want to get done. And because you have to come back on the same train, it's only 40 minutes at the top. That is a very short period of time for this type of a train expedition. You will not get to do everything that you would want to do at the top of the mountain in only 40 minutes. I was very disappointed with that part because I never got a chance to see what was truly in the visitor center. And I had to speed around at the top, even to get to the various visual sites. And let me mention, it's not easy to speed around at 14,000 feet altitude. You automatically need to walk a little slower because there's much less oxygen at the top. And so this became a challenge. So I barely got through the sites on the top of Pikes Peak. And my husband didn't get through the whole thing of walking through the sites because he was walking a lot more slowly than I was. And of course, because there are no bathrooms on the train, one of the stops you have to make at the top is to the restroom facility. So that's a given. You must go to the restroom, maybe see a site or two, and then you're back on the train and you have to come back down. Now, the train is a little confusing when it comes to returning and getting back down the mountain. And they warn you, they tell you this train will leave precisely at X hour. Make sure that you are there because if you are not there, the train is going to leave. Now, you get that briefing over and over on the way up to the top of Pikes Peak. And once the train lands, they remind you again, they tell you all about the fact that the train does not wait for you. So if you're late, you're going to miss the train. Well, what was interesting about that is that there was some confusion about getting back to the train, and there were a few things they did not reference or tell you about. So, one of the confusions is if you show up at the track and you're the only train there, you don't know to distinguish between your train and another train. So when we were about to leave, there were two trains on the track. I didn't know which one was our train, and I didn't remember the exact detail of where we were parked. And so they look just alike. They're all red trains. They have cars one, two, and three. And I remember hesitating on the platform, which one is our train? Because, it had compartment one, but I wasn't sure that was the right train. And it's a good thing that I didn't get on that one because our train was the next one over. And you had to cross over a little bit of I'll say a little bridging area to get to where our train was. And I thought, wow, I lost a couple minutes just fooling around with that to get to the train. And my husband was standing in front of that platform, although I couldn't see him from where I was. And he was worried, where is she? How come she's not getting here to the train? But as it turned out, I was there in time. We both got on the train, we got in our seats, and we were fine. Now, what is confusing is to know which door to get on to get to your compartment. So there was another couple, another older couple, and they apparently went to the wrong door in terms of getting on this train. And so you can't cross between the cars. So they got off the train, walked up to the correct door, which was in the same compartment where we were, and right before they got to the door, the train door closed. And it was exactly 12 o'clock noon, not a second off. And the train pulled out of the station. And those of us who were in that compartment one, we were all shocked and mortified. What? You closed the door? You left these people on the platform? And we just were amazed and outraged in the sense that the conductor would leave the people on the platform. And he just went along as though it was no big deal. We leave people every day was kind of like his attitude. And the thing that's interesting, if you get left, it's really a big deal because the seats on the other trains are all sold. You're not going to be able to take an empty seat on another train to come back down. And what they warn you about is that I'll say the staff up at the top of the mountain, like the ranger staff, they drive you down for an exorbitant rate. It's a long way to drive and it costs a lot of money. And once you get down to the bottom on the driving route, you're still a long way away from Manitou Springs where you're parked. So you have to take maybe an $80 Uber ride even to get back to the train depot in Manitou Springs. So it is no minor issue to miss the train. Made me think about the days when my husband and I lived in Germany, because in Germany it's such a precise culture. And if they tell you the train is pulling out of the station at 12 o'clock noon, do not show up at 12:01. The train will be gone. And so it's really on that kind of a system being so precise. Now, what they don't tell you that really could be helpful if you did know is to give you, like I said, the exact location of your train on the track, just in case there's another train that's there when you get there, to minimize that confusion. And so you don't lose time. They should give you some grid coordinates so you know where your train is parked. And secondly, my husband noticed that each train actually did have a train number. It's real small, written on the front of the train. They probably should have shared that, because then you would be able to distinguish your train from another train that was there, since they look exactly the same. But we weren't given the train number, so there was no way to actually tell which train was ours. The other thing they didn't share, even though they said be on time, we leave precisely at this hour, the conductor talked about this later after we had left these people up at the top of Pikes Peak. He mentioned that once the door shuts, it can't be reopened. Now, he didn't say that in any of his previous briefings. That might have been useful information to know, because these people were standing directly in front of the door. And you would think if you're right there in front of the door that they could open the door. He said, but no, once that door is shut, he has no ability to open the door. Well, we didn't know that. The other thing that we didn't know, and that's interesting, is it's such a precision operation, because at the same time we're going back down the track, there's another train coming up the track, and there is only one track. So there's a place where our train going down has to pull over into a slight waiting area and let the upbound train take the main track and continue up the mountain. So if you don't get there at the right time, you would cause a delay, because then the upbound train has to wait for you to get to the point where you pull off. And so all of this is relevant. It's down to a precise science, but we weren't informed about those parts of the situation. Although I think it would have been useful to know some of that in advance. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here, reminding you that change is very challenging and difficult, even under the best of circumstances. If you are going through an organizational change, it goes better when you know the steps, the order of the steps, and what to do. So contact me to walk through what will work best for your organization. I can be reached at Dr. Dr. Period Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. We were going through this experience and thinking about these open and closed doors. I thought about a few applications, some workplace applications, and also just some applications in life. When we think about the workplace, there are open and closed doors in the workplace as well. There are some time limited work related opportunities, and those opportunities can cycle and circle around for a period of time. There's a window in which you may be able to avail yourself of an opportunity for a promotion, for a new job. Maybe it's an overseas posting or position, or perhaps it's a lateral move where you have a chance for some cross training in a new area that you want to learn about. And maybe if you don't take it this month or this year, the door is still open next year or the year after. And there comes a point when that door shuts and you really miss whatever that opportunity is. And mind you, some closed doors are really a benefit. God will close the door because it's really not in your best interest. Okay, so that's fine. You don't want to walk through a door that He has closed in that case. And then other times, a closed door is something that you missed the timeline. It would have been to your benefit. And now things are worse for you because you didn't walk through the door. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the life application section, which I'll mention now. And that is, in life, we are here on earth for a time and a purpose. And the time is shorter than we think. And as James 4:14 reminds us, our lives are but a vapor that appears for a short while and then vanishes away. And even if you live a very long life, let's say 100 years or more, that's a long, long life. 100 years is just a small blip on the eternal calendar. And the longer you live, the faster each year goes. I can't believe how short it is now from one Christmas to the next. So our lives really are but a vapor that appears for a short while and then vanishes away. And then the book of Ecclesiastes, and particularly the 12th chapter, reminds us to remember our Creator in the days of our youth, while we can still remember our Creator, while we can still make some choices because we're still here on the planet, we're in our right mind. And he says, because the evil days are coming and we may not have the opportunity to make the choice that we think that we have. Sometimes we think that we can wait until later to make a decision for God and for his purposes for our lives. And what we don't know is that we might not even be here in that next year. Our life might end and we may no longer be on the planet. And we also miss the fact that we may not be in a position to make a decision for God because now our hearts are hardened the way that Pharaoh's heart was hardened because at every turn he kept rejecting God's opportunity till finally he just missed it altogether and his heart was so hard he wasn't going to choose the right thing anyway. And we have to remember that even as the door may close, such as on this train, and this couple was left standing on the platform. God is patient. He doesn't close the door right away. He's really not willing that any should perish. He's giving us plenty of time to make our decision. However, if you don't make a decision in the time that's allotted, at some point, the door is going to close. And I'm thinking about Noah, who was preaching for years and years about this flood, these rains that were going to come. And back on the earth at that time, it had never rained. So the people didn't know what rain was. They didn't understand this concept. But he said it was going to be rain. He said they were going to need to be in this ark of safety. And he was building this big boat. Nobody understood it. They thought he was crazy, building this big, huge ark. And at some point, at the appointed time when the rains were to come, God is the one who put Noah, his family, and the animals all in the ark. And then God shut the door. Now, once God closes the door, you're not getting in. And God closed the door of that ark. If you weren't in the ark at the time he closed the door, I don't care how the floods were raging outside. You could be knocking on the boat, whatever. You could not get into the ark. Similar thing is true with Sodom and Gomorrah. At the time when God chose to destroy these two wicked cities, Lot and his family had a short window of time to get out of the city. And if they didn't get out, they would be subject to the fire and brimstone destruction of the city. So all those people down in Sodom and Gomorrah who were not out, they were caught in the fire and the brimstone. Lot and his family, they left quickly in order to escape this destruction. The angel let them out. And unfortunately, Lot's wife, as we know, she hesitated and she looked back. And in her case, she missed the train to safety because she was turned into a pillar of salt. So there's the warning in Hebrews 3rd chapter, verses 15 through 17, where it says, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart. So God is calling each of us today, and while we are still here. And while we are still here, we can say yes to God, yes to a relationship with Him, yes to His purpose for our lives while we are still here. And Jesus would go on to say in John 9, starting in verse 4, he talked about how he must work the works of his Father who sent him. And he says, I must work while it is day because night comes when no man can work. And night comes for each of us in our individual lives. And night also comes when the world ends. So if we happen to be here when the world ends and that night comes, there's nothing more that we can do because the night has come. So, some of the lessons I want to bring out of this whole concept of open and closed doors is that just like on the train, they sound the alarm, the whistle. They give you a period of time to get to the train. The whistle starts at about 10 minutes before departure time. So when you hear the alarm sounding, it means you better be moving to the destination if you expect to get on the train before the door closes. So we have to heed the warnings when we hear them. When that whistle blows, we've better be moving feet to the train. You have to get to the train on time. And when you get there on time, there is a specific reserved seat waiting just for you on the train. And there's no seat on another train. Don't miss your train. Heed the warnings when you hear the whistle blowing. That's true in our lives. No matter what we're doing in our lives, there's a whistle blowing, and we don't want to miss it. The Apostle John in Revelation 4 talks about seeing a door standing open in heaven. And he heard a first voice of a trumpet that was saying to him, Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. So we are seeing a picture of the future through John, where God has an open door in heaven, an opportunity for us to be there and join Him in the heavenly place. So Jesus said He's going to prepare a place for us in heaven so that where He is, we can be also, and we can come there also. And John got a glimpse of that heavenly place in the vision that he had while on the Isle of Patmos. So I'd say it's more than a vision. He actually took a journey in the spirit while he was on the Isle of Patmos. And then we find in the life of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians, the second chapter, and he talks about how the Lord opens doors. And he says, when he came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, and a door was opened to him by the Lord to preach the good news of the gospel, because it's through that preaching of the good news that we even know about the door in heaven that is standing open, and that Jesus is beckoning to us to come in to that open door. And he goes on to say that we are to God the fragrance of Christ among those who are being saved and also among those who are perishing. So while we are here, we are blowing the whistle, and we are reminding and warning people that the train is going to depart and they have an opportunity to get on it before the door closes. So I'd like to conclude our time today with a reading from Revelation. And this is also a reminder and a warning. And we know that the revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ, and it was given to encourage the church, to remind the church that He is coming back and to remain faithful in the meantime. So, as the message from Jesus is going out to the church at Philadelphia, this is what is written in Revelation, the third chapter, verses 7 and 8 of Revelations 3. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, These things says He who is holy, He who is true, He who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name. So, though we have little strength, we can keep God's word. We can proclaim and not deny his name. And when we do that, we see that there's a door standing open in heaven, a door that no one can shut but God himself. And he stands at the door right now and is knocking. So let us open the door that's open. Let us walk through the door that is open. Don't let the train door close on you. God has issued the invitation and he wants you on the train. Have a blessed day. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here, and I want to tell you about my book, which is called Lead Yourself First, the Senior Leader's Guide to Engaging Your People for Greater Performance and Impact. It's a book to inspire you about the challenges that you have overcome and the vision that you've realized in your life. It's from these struggles, triumphs, and temporary setbacks that others will be inspired and that they will have the courage to lead themselves first and also to lead others. In the first chapter, which is called Envision the Future, I talk about the rocky education path that I had to forge and overcome to realize my vision to become a psychologist. And that was all the way from elementary school straight through graduate school. There were obstacles. The path wasn't easy. And yet, entering graduate school with only $30 in the bank, I ended up finishing graduate school with no debts. When you walk step by step in the vision, even when it doesn't look like where you want to be, doors open and resources come to you because you hold the vision and you keep walking. So here's what I wanted to say to you. Lead yourself first. This book will walk you through your journey as you go through the open doors and as you continue to walk, just like I walked through mine. So get your copy of Lead Yourself First. Hold the vision for yourself and your life and be successful. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership. And today we are talking about new days require new ways. And so I want to share with you some strategies and ways to approach new times in your business, new times in your organization. And sometimes we're in seasons and in scenarios when what we did previously will no longer work. In other words, those routes, those pathways have been blocked. And so we have to find a new way forward than what we're accustomed to using. So, the first thing I think that's important when you're in a situation like this is to remember that you have, as an executive business leader, as a person of Christian faith, you have creativity and innovation from God Himself. God is endlessly creative and innovative. We are made in God's image. And so we have the ability to also call on the kind of creativity that allows us to reimagine the future. So sometimes you just look a lane over and you say, what could we do that maybe we haven't done before, but it's close enough to what we've been doing, we can easily launch that new idea or that new approach. That's reaching a lane over. At other times, you'll have to think radically and outside of the box for whatever the next step is. And remember, this show, this program is for Christian executives who really appreciate a biblical perspective on life and leadership. And so today I'm going to share with you some ideas that are just general ideas, and I'm also going to share some biblical narratives as well. So, after thinking about creativity and innovation, what you can do that's close to what you're already doing, and then what's radically different because maybe the first way's been blocked, the second thing that I would say is when those old roads get blocked, you have to find new paths, new roads, new highways. And sometimes you might even have to change the vehicles that you use to travel and to navigate the terrain. I remember a time when I was driving and we had a huge rainstorm here in Colorado Springs. And Colorado Springs is high desert, so our soil is not the kind of soil like you have on the East Coast that can absorb a lot of rain. We really can't absorb and handle a lot of rain. And so the streets were badly flooded. And I remember coming up to a traffic light where normally I would turn left to go up this hill. And that street, the bottom of the hill, there was a big, huge puddle of water, not like a normal puddle. This was more like a little pond. And it was really difficult to see, is this water too deep for my vehicle or not? And you couldn't see it until you got right up to the light where you're supposed to make the left turn. And what I noticed is that other cars were getting through it, but that water was up pretty high on those cars. Now, my car is a little different vehicle than the vehicles that I saw going through the water. I did not see any cars like mine going through that water, and I decided in that moment, this is probably not safe. I might get stuck. My car could get flooded. So I remember it was a huge intersection. I had to pause my vehicle almost essentially in the middle of the intersection because I had to suddenly at the last minute abort that left turn and decide not to go left. And so I knew I had to go straight, but by this time, traffic in the other direction is moving, so I can't go straight because I'd run right into that traffic. So I had to kind of be somewhat out of the way, even though I was somewhat in the middle of the street, and wait for the light to change. And when it did, I decided to go straight ahead up this particular hill, and that turned out to be a very good decision. I took an alternative route and I got home, which was my destination at the time. Now, I could imagine that if I had to come back to that setting, and let's say the water was still high and it was still impassable, I might have to borrow a vehicle from a friend, have a friend take me who had a higher vehicle, one that could be above those waters. And so there are times when what you're traveling in won't work, and you'll just have to find, borrow, purchase, or get a better vehicle for the current circumstances and situations. So you want to think about that in your business, using your creativity, reimagining the future, thinking radically outside the box, what's right next door that you could do, and what alternative roads can you take if the one you normally take is blocked and it's flooded. And sometimes these roads get blocked or flooded, as I say, because legislation has changed. There are new federal rules and laws or new state rules and laws or municipalities and cities and so on. There are many things that could stop our forward progress. And so you want to just think about that and imagine that there's another way. Thirdly, I would say what's really important is to seek new partners, new collaborations, people who may have very different networks from the networks that you have, the ones that you're accustomed to going through and to using. So, in times of new ways and a lot of change, you have to broaden your viewpoint and think about those people who you normally would not think about. So, who could be some partners you haven't considered? Who's out there that could come alongside you in this season and you could collaborate together to help each other navigate the roads and navigate the highways and the byways? Sometimes you have to bring in new leadership to your own organization because you've taken the organization as far as you can go. And one of the people I've previously interviewed is Brian Smith, who was the founder of UGG Boots. And it takes a lot of capital, a lot of financing to really bring these boots to the marketplace and these products that are not one size fit all. So you have to carry a lot of different sizes and everything else. And he had had a lot of challenges getting the funding and the resourcing that he needed. And he grew the organization from its infancy. So it got to a point where now it was attractive to someone who might want to acquire it and who had deeper pockets to fund the future. So ultimately, that's what he ended up doing. He recognized as an entrepreneur, he took the business as far as he could take it. And now it was going to require a level of financial input, and also it would require a level of maintenance of what had been created, not just the work of something new and different that you have on the entrepreneurial phase. And some people are great startup people. They're the ones to start and get an organization going. And then it's time for them to leave and let the maintainers come in while the true entrepreneurs go start something else and do something else. So you want to think of not only those partners and collaborators who are outside of your organization and who have different networks, who bring different talents, gifts, and also different resources that could help you with whatever your agenda is right now. Even think about how you could resource the inside of your organization to bring in people who know how to do what you may not know how to do with the new ways that are in place at the current time. So just think about that. You may need to bring in some reinforcements, bring in some help, if you will. Number four, I would say, since I mentioned that often with new laws, the previous ways, what we did before won't work. They've been blocked, just like the road that's flooded, with the flood waters. So what you want to think about is what other laws that we normally might not think about or other principles exist, and how could we use those routes even though we haven't used them before? So when the previous way is blocked, look at not what's missing, but what is remaining, what is still there, whether you've used it or not, and think, how can we use this new approach to get to where we want to be? So you want to think about there may be some new approaches, some new rules and laws that you can leverage, and you want to look for what you can leverage that maybe you've never used before. And in order to do some of this, we're really talking about some scenario planning. You have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and you want to be able to move with speed and agility, because sometimes when you're on that alternate route, you are flying a little bit under the radar on the alternate route until they discover that you've taken this new route, and now they want to block that too. So before they block it, use it, make it work for you so that you get all the juice out of that you can until you look for the next thing. So sometimes you don't always broadcast what you're doing. You may do what you're doing under a little bit of a cloak of hiddenness, because it's like you have a baby plant that you are growing and you don't want it to be eaten up by anyone until you get it strong enough that it can last on its own. So I would say that this is an important aspect and way to think about it as well. And then number five, which I think is incredibly important, is to create your own new day and new way. In other words, don't sit back and wait for someone else to create the new day for you. You sometimes have to create your own day. Don't wait for other people to do it. So, in the spirit of continuous learning, figure out what it is you need to learn, what new information you require, what new relationships you require, and what new pathways you require. So, this is a mindset thing where you are looking for new opportunities and sometimes new communities to serve with the products and services that you have. You want to identify more ways to become even more self-sufficient. And you might say, well, we don't have the resources to fund what it is that we're doing right now. You may not have it by yourself. However, you might have it in combination with the partners, the new collaborations that you will develop. And remember, if you're collecting a little bit from a lot of people, that little bit multiplied multiple times actually has value and actually has benefit. So you may not have all that you need, but you may have some and be able to get other people to really sign on to the vision because that vision also benefits them as well. So think about who else would be benefited by the vision of what you're creating and invite them to give sometimes small amounts that would add up to what you really need. Now, there are also some things that I would say don't do in this season. Let me mention some of those. So, number one, don't waste too much time lamenting the past, the losses from the past because of the changes. Now, I'm not saying don't lament at all. We do need sometimes periods of mourning when there's been losses. So, if you are going through a loss of a pathway or a way, take some little bit of time to mourn about it, but then you want to redirect that energy to create the future. And the more time you spend lamenting on the past, you will not be able to create the future. So when you're thinking about the past, think about, well, how did we get here? Why did this work? What else could we create that would work just as well or even better? Because you can create something better. You can create something that works even to your advantage in a greater way just because you may not have thought about it in a while, but now you've got this burning platform to think about it. So I would say don't waste too much time lamenting, get to work planning the future and what's next. Number two, don't keep doing what you previously did that no longer works. That wastes time, it wastes energy and resources, and you may have additional losses. So if I had driven my car through that flooded water area, and my car wasn't able to handle it, not only would it be a problem, I could have lost my life, I could have lost my vehicle, I certainly wouldn't have gotten to where I'm going. It would have been a very expensive decision. So you want to know if a way is blocked for a good reason, then don't waste your resources there. Identify the new paths and go in the new direction. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here, reminding you that change is very challenging and difficult, even under the best of circumstances. If you are going through an organizational change, it goes better when you know the steps, the order of the steps, and what to do. So contact me to walk through what will work best for your organization. I can be reached at Dr. Dr. Period Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Number three, the thing I say not to do is don't waste time blaming and demonizing those who you see as responsible for your current losses or the current blocked pathway. Again, you want to direct your energy towards mobilizing new partners and new ways, and in most cases, when old ways have been blocked, and particularly if they've been effectively blocked and there are many barriers, you probably aren't going to be able to go it alone to get to the new pathways and to go to the new direction. So I would say you definitely don't want to waste time blaming and demonizing. Look for the new. Look for the new partners so that you can get to work right away without wasting time, create those new directions, and recognize you aren't able to do it necessarily by yourself. Now, the most important thing I'm going to say is what I'm saying next, and that is we actually have the greatest supernatural weapon that there is out there. And that supernatural resource is God Himself. And keep in mind, God sees the whole picture. He knows what we don't know. He knows where the alternate pathways are. He knows where the new highways and byways are. He has directions for us to get around the flooded areas. He has guidance. So often we are so triggered by the challenge and the difficulty, we forget to stop. We forget to ask God, who knows everything. God knows it all, and He is willing to encourage us if we are willing to seek that knowledge and what it is that He knows. And I just want to remind you that in Judges, the seventh chapter, when Gideon recognized that he had this huge battle ahead of him. And he was afraid, and he had already set out the fleeces. Well, God, if you really want it to be me and me to handle this, put the dew on the fleece and not on the land, or put the dew on the land and not on the fleece. He had gone through all of these tests. God had cut his army down to only 300 soldiers, which was essentially nothing in comparison to the over 120 some thousand soldiers he was facing on the other side with the Midianites, who even got help from the Amalekites. He's knowing that 300 soldiers against these huge armies alone is not enough. Yet God wanted him to have only 300 soldiers because God's plan was God was going to get this victory. And he also wanted the honor for that victory. He did not want his people to say, oh, by our power, we did this. No, it wasn't going to be their power. It was going to be by God's power. So on one occasion, when Gideon was kind of afraid and wondering, is this battle going to work? God told him, go down to the camp of the Midianites and hear what they're talking about. See, God knows what people are talking about in their camps. And so he took a person with him, Gideon, and went down on the top of the hill and listened to what was going on down in the Midianite camp. And two guys were talking about one of them who had had a dream. And in this dream, this loaf of barley had rolled through the Midianite camp and caused all of this destruction. And then they finally concluded this can be none other than the sword of Gideon, and Gideon being the son of Joash. And they knew that they were in trouble with respect to this battle. So Gideon is empowered by this vision of what was happening down in the Midianite camp. He went back to his troops and he said, here's what we need to do to get ready. And he now had the confidence. He gave them the strategy and the battle plan for the next day. And it was all what God had already given him and shared with him anyway. So I simply say that since God knows it all and sees it all, we would be wise to ask him for that picture of what we need to see, which we won't see on our own. But we know that God is all seeing, all knowing, all wise, and there is nothing that he is not aware of. Another situation that I want to bring up is really in the life of Elisha, the prophet of God. And as they were making plans, meaning the king of Syria was making plans because they wanted to declare war against Israel at the time. And so I want to just read a little bit of what happened here because God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all that we could ask or think. Prior to what I'm going to read, Elisha had already blinded the Syrians and taken them into Samaria. So he had already done some things. And so now this is what happens. Now, the king of Syria was making war against Israel, and he consulted with his servants, saying, my camp will be in such and such a place. And the man of God sent to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. Then the king of Israel sent someone to the place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, and he was watchful there, not just once or twice. Therefore, the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So, what I'm saying, people of God, is this: God is able to let you know what others are saying in their bedroom so that it benefits the mission and the purpose that He has for your life and for your company and your business and what you are doing. Our problem is that we don't always seek God's face and ask Him for His supernatural input. But when we do, He is faithful and He is able to provide that input. So that's illustration number 2. And then thirdly, I want to share an illustration from the life of Nehemiah. We know that Nehemiah was the cupbearer and the Persian king, and he asked to go back to his homeland to go to Jerusalem to build the wall because he had heard that the walls were broken down, the city was open, it wasn't protected, and he wanted to be part of the solution here. So the king allowed him to go back, from captivity and to take care of this business of rebuilding the wall. Now, when the neighbors heard that Nehemiah and the Israelites were going to build the wall, they were very upset. They got angry. They did a lot of things to try to prevent that wall from being built. Sometimes they pretended to be with Nehemiah and his people, and they claimed to be allies when in fact they were just pretending. They weren't really allies. And then sometimes they would send people over to give speeches to discourage the people who were building the wall. And so Nehemiah had to then rebuild up the courage of the people after these periods of discouragement. And then, even in one occasion, they tried to lure Nehemiah away from the work, away from the wall, and bring him to the temple that was not the place for him to be or to go. And he basically sent a message back, why should I leave the great work that I'm doing to come over there and talk to you in the temple? So they tried everything. And all of these efforts were failing. And so a couple of other things that Nehemiah put into place is that he took half of the people who were building on the wall and made them the lookouts. So they were kind of like the soldiers that were guarding the effort. And then the other half that were building the wall, they had their weapons strapped onto them as well. So if they had to suddenly stop building and fight against those who were fighting against them, then they would be able to do it if they had to do that. And so ultimately, God gave them grace and favor. They ended up building the wall in such a way that it was built fast, faster than would ever normally be possible. And the people in the surrounding nations, they were baffled because how did they do this? The people were not great in number. They were few in number. They didn't have a lot of resources. They didn't have a lot of strength. But when you have God, you have every resource that you need. And so, people of God, I say that we have God the Father standing beside us, and we have God the Son, the Messiah of God, standing to the right hand of the Father, who's interceding for us every day about what it is we need. And so, finally, in Nehemiah, we will see that as the wall was finished, and I'm going to read two verses, Nehemiah, the sixth chapter, verses 15 through 16. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. And it happened when all our enemies heard of it and all the nations around us saw these things that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived that this work was done by our God. And that's the thing you have to think about. When God does it, no man can prevail against it. When God does it, you head in the right direction and you do the right things because He's the one that's leading the mission. He's the one that's leading the charge. And so I say again to all of us out there, yes, the most important thing is to seek the face of God and get His guidance and direction all along the way. If you were to go back in these biblical accounts, they didn't pray just once. They prayed repeatedly. They prayed over and over again to continue to get God's guidance in every aspect of it. And while you're doing that, yes, you want to do all the other things I mentioned. Use the creativity and innovation and go where God leads. You want to find new roads when the old roads are blocked and ask Him where those new roads are located. You want to seek new partners and new collaborators. And because some people will pretend to be your allies when they're not, you want to seek God for guidance there too, so that you're not aligned with the wrong people. You want to ask for if they're leaders you need to bring into your organization and who are they. Get God's wisdom on that. You also want to find out what are the laws and what are the principles out there that are still in place, routes that you may not have used that you could now use. Ask God about those routes. Where are they? Let Him lead you and let Him guide you. And then at the end of the day, you want to create your own new day and way. And it's really not your own because God is the one who's leading you to that new way and that new day. And rather than wasting time lamenting, stop and thank God for the direction that he's giving you, for the direction in which he's leaving you. And don't do the old thing because that's already blocked. Thank God for the new way, which he will reveal, and stay in his presence until he reveals it. No need to blame others or worry about it. We know that there are people who will be against the way in which we are going. However, when God's on your side, you have a majority, so don't worry about them. Move in the direction where he's calling you and with the new resources that he's going to bring. So I would say this: for new days, there are new ways. Seek God to find them and be blessed as he leads you into the path of success. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here. Did you know that you can mine the lessons from your own life and work experiences to inspire your teams and your people? So in my book, Lead Yourself First, the Senior Leader's Guide to Engaging Your People for Greater Performance and Impact, I share snippets of my life experiences from childhood all the way up to adulthood. I also share what I learned from these experiences, how that learning informs how I lead today, and I share some examples of how I facilitate my client success with these same principles. So I invite you also to apply the same methodology to your life with reflection questions at the end of each chapter. So when you lead yourself first, you then have a foundation for leading others. In chapter 2, which is called Run Your Own Race, I share some stories from my days as an active duty Army officer when my approach to running the 2 miles for the physical training test and also my approach for the 12-mile forced road march had to be different from what other people did. So what I would say is dare to be different. Find your own success formula. Sometimes what works for you is different from what works for others. So remember to run your own race, and remember to get your own copy of Lead Yourself First, and you'll find resources for how to run your own race. Thank you for listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. I am also your concierge executive leadership advisor for when you need to make tough business decisions, facilitate executive succession and transition, develop your executive team, lead change, create a positive and profitable culture, or leverage marketplace creative advantage. You can reach me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Also go to my website, transleadership.com, for more leadership resources and insights. I want to give special thanks to Ron McNoll, gospel jazz saxophonist and national Billboard recording artist, also known as Mr. Sirius XM Jazz Watercolors, for allowing us to use his gifted music on our show. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.